Good Shabbos, everybody.
Good Shabbos.
Did Alabama win? Just making sure. What about Auburn?
Roll Tide.
They're tied?
No, I said Roll Tide. Roll Tide.
Oh, okay. The crowd's so big tonight, so make sure. Okay. Something fascinating about Parshat Kisah. Here we are in the book of Exodus. And this is going to be the instruction of building the tabernacle, which, when you look at all of the ramifications, it's a very big job. But our rabbis have fun playing with the Midrash, because after all, how could such a figure, Bezalel, build something so incredible? And here is the beautiful drash that they offer. God picked Bezalel when he was only 13 years old, became a bar mitzvah, to begin the construction of the tabernacle. That he could have figured out how to build such a beautiful thing, that the tabernacle was a remarkable accomplishment. Not just remarkable, but a miracle in itself. The reason why it was a miracle, because of the slavery in Egypt that Israel had been subjugated to, that he was able to construct the handy skills to build God's resting place. And they say when he did it, he had God's Spirit within him, God's wisdom within him, and insight. And there's something special about such a crafty person, that God endowed him with the capability to serve wherever they are beyond their human potential. So this task was beyond any ordinary human potential to fulfill. A miracle in its construction, the tabernacle. Now, how does this relate to us today? We don't have the tabernacle, but for me, the greatest miracle in the modern period for the Jewish people is the state of Israel. I think it's so similar. Slavery for 400 plus years, he has the acumen to construct such a thing. Here we were wandering for nearly 2,500 years, and we have the insight to establish our indigenous homeland. We're going to put aside the recent feuding between Jew versus Jew. We're going to get to it in a moment regarding the state of Israel. And we're going to put aside the Arab enemies that Israel faces. But during the founding of the state of Israel, and there was going to be chaos. Jew versus Jew at its worst points. Sound familiar? The Atalanta affair. And here we have the IDF fighting violence versus the Irgun, the underground militia. Menachem Begin versus Ben-Gurion. If this goes on to create a civil war, the dream of the miracle, it would have never happened. Menachem Begin, he found a way to step aside for the sake, B'nei Darsek Shalom, for the sake of peace, for the sake of this miracle. It had to survive. Ben-Gurion became prime minister, and Begin went off to a different path. But then when Begin became prime minister, we heard it then, it was going to be the end of democracy in Israel. They were saying it then. It was going to be the end of democracy. Why? Because it was the end of the dominance of the Labor Party. Many Jews, excluding those who are living outside the land of Israel, again, it'd be the end of the democratic process in the state of Israel, because a Likudnik became the prime minister. There's much more minutia and there's much more nuance. His appointment, his election to prime ministry, was really about uniting the Mizrahi Jews and the Sephardic Jews who felt alienated, and his legacy, though complicated, was also incredibly successful. Peace with Egypt, and Israel found a way to survive. It wasn't the end of the democratic process. And here we are right now. It's March, a few months in with Netanyahu's reign as prime minister. Many Jews in Israel and many Jews in the diaspora feel that this, once again, is the end of democracy in Israel. Does anyone know the REM song, It's the End of This World and We Know It? Okay. I have colleagues issuing sermons that their flexion, that their inability to sleep of night because of Netanyahu's moves regarding the courts. And moreover, their distaste with certain members of his cabinet. It is the end of democracy as we know it. We're just going to take a break from It's the End of Democracy as we know it. A little breathing room. Let's look at the nuance and let's put aside the hyperbolic speech about the situation. The first thing is that America and Israel have a special and unique bond. And regardless what happens here or in the land of Israel, our partnership and allyship is crucial and it must be celebrated. Netanyahu is back in power. When Israelis picked the majority of seats of Likud, they voted for an individual knowing he would form said cabinet. The Israelis can protest the situation. Israelis can detest certain cabinet selections. And we have the absolute right that they are questioning the idea of the 61 majority taking away decisions from their Supreme Court. It's all fair. But at the same time, it's absolutely okay to question Israel's lack of judicial review. There's no constitution. And for those who have taken AP history, you'll have this first question: what was Marbury versus Madison in 1803, creating the principle of judicial review, the power of federal courts to declare legislation and executive acts unconstitutional? There's no Marbury versus Madison in the state of Israel. So it's okay to evaluate when Supreme Court President back in the 90s, Ehud Barak, pretty much established an Israeli Supreme Court with unchecked powers. It's okay to question all these things that are going on in the state of Israel. It's also okay to discuss the right of return. In Israel's creation, they passed a law: if you're a quarter Jew, you have the right to return to Eretz Yisrael. But right now, those claim to be a quarter Jew, religiously, ethically, they're not Jewish. And it's becoming a major problem with the ethos of the question, the country. So it's absolutely okay to have a conversation regarding current laws. Israelis are protesting, American Jews are protesting, but how great in both of our countries. We can take to the streets to voice our concerns and we don't have fear of being arrested. But nonetheless, the hyperbole from American rabbis and a concerning, what I deem anti-Semitic double standard the American press puts on Israel. Israel has really big problems. The myriad of terrorist attacks, there was one last night in Tel Aviv injuring 3 Israelis. There are thousands of rockets in southern Lebanon from Hezbollah. We have an Iran who will soon have a nuclear weapon. And just today, news broke that China brokered a deal for Saudi Arabia and Iran to begin having diplomatic relationships. These are real problems. South Africa downgrading ties to Israel. Israel has real problems. So this is what we get. The paper of record, New York Times op writer Thomas Friedman, just published an article, American Jews, You Have to Choose Sides on Israel. Friedman is telling us, American Jews, we have to pick a side, finally get out of the debate because of Netanyahu's proposed changes to the Supreme Court. The best thing about this country is the First Amendment. And Thomas, we don't know each other. You are absolutely entitled to your opinion. It's amazing that we get to live in a country where we get to write an article and not fear being arrested. We're allowed to have our opinions, and your opinion must be celebrated. And if you ever hear these words, I'd like to invite you down here to Birmingham and have a discussion regarding Israel. We can talk about your past op-ed theories regarding your concern of Israel. We can evaluate your concern regarding your thought would be the failure of the Abrahamic Accords, but we want to have a conversation. So for this, I'm writing this a letter to you, and it goes like this. So, dear Thomas, I have a few questions. Have you ever asked Russian Americans to pick a side? Have you ever asked Chinese Americans to pick a side, what's going on in their indigenous country? What about European Americans? Whether you're Flemish, you come from France, or British, we can probably suggest that many European countries still engage in colonialism light in Africa. Are you asking them to denounce their country with your continued relationship with the Iranians? What about Persian Americans, mostly in Los Angeles? Are you asking them to pick a side? Israel's not like these countries, so it's ridiculous that I have to ask, but it's a fair question now. Second, you quoted a sermon by a rabbi in Los Angeles who took the risk to challenge Israel, calling this a new phenomenon, which she said, death by Israel sermon. And you repeated her lines, a death by Israel sermon for critiquing against Israel that would be the end of her career. Let's just process those words, a death by Israel sermon. There's been a myriad of deaths in Israel by terrorist attacks, real deaths. I promise you, an American rabbi isn't going to die by giving an Israel sermon. In your article, you were upset that Netanyahu often was demonizing Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority. You were upset because this act would be a threat to peace. Now, here's the question. We're talking about a corrupt leader, Mahmoud Abbas, a man whose dissertation celebrated Holocaust denial, a man who also celebrates a Palestinian law that pays terrorist families in perpetuity money when they kill Jews. Okay, so let's just juxtapose. Netanyahu, who calls Abbas names, or Abbas, who pays the families of terrorists. You were very concerned about members of Netanyahu's cabinet. I think that's fair game. But in the previous government in Israel, which was even more right-wing than this Israel, did you ever concern your problems with the Islamist party that was in the cabinet? Or the members of Knesset who back in 2016, these are Arab Israelis, member of Knesset, who were visiting the families of terrorists during the stabbing intifada. I'm going to repeat that. During 2015 and 2016, Israeli Arabs who were members of government were coming to mourn families of terrorists who killed Jews as they were shot in the action. Have you ever called out your employer, the New York Times, for the hiring of freelance reporters in the region who have celebrated Hitler and have celebrated Hamas attacks? And have you ever called out the paper of record for its past burying the Holocaust? No, Thomas, I celebrate the ideals of America and freedom of speech. But even in Israel, and even in the Hebrew language, American Jews, you have to pick a side. There's nothing binary about Judaism. There's not even a word in Hebrew that's for binary. It's binary, it's a cognate. The Hebrew word is rab panim, which means it's multifaceted. We look at the minutiae, we look at the pratim, the details. We live in the shades of gray. It's not about picking a side. And based on Israel's history, she will endure. There'll be good days, there'll be bad days, but democracy will survive. It always had. When I lived in Israel in 2008 on Shabbat, I often was playing basketball in Liberty Park, and this is right near the Emanu-El Hotel. It would be a celebration of rabbinic students playing terrible basketball, but Arab Israelis would come and they would have a barbecue. Certain Arab women would wear hijab and some weren't. But I want you to vision the scene. Certain Arab women wearing a hijab and certain women not. What happens in Iran if a woman doesn't wear a hijab? You guys just answered the question. So, Israel has a free press. It has freedom of speech. It has right to assemble and to protest. It's complicated just like any other country. And just like in our government, we deem certain elected officials who are unfit, there are Israelis who deem certain elected officials are unfit. It's all fair game. We live in the shades of gray. Our side isn't to choose because of what's going to happen. We are commanded, like Bezalel, to see the miracle of the Jewish story. And we love Israel unconditionally, and we will love Israel no matter what, and will always support her. Words matter, actions matter. And I don't know if you or the myriad of rabbis can actually see that Israel has big problems. World Jewry has big problems. We're witnessing records of violence against Jews, the erasing of Jews of American life caused by a new ethos that has no interest in uniqueness or merit, where this new collective doesn't include Jews. Again, words matter and actions matter. It's not the end of Israeli democracy. Last week, I was looking at past funerals and eulogies that I did. And I remembered I officiated at a husband and wife that died a year apart. This was back in 2017 and 2018. During the intake with their kids, they both remembered being at home in 1967. Their mom and dad were in front of the television. They were at Hebrew school, listening to the radio. And for 6 days, their parents didn't move, wondering if next day we would hear that Israel would no longer be a state. Some of you can remember 1967. You're glued to that television, you're glued to the radio, you are praying to God that Israel would be there tomorrow. Now that is legitimate fear. I think 50 years from now, 100 years from now, we'll debate everything. Who is in office in both countries? But one thing has to be clear. Supporting Israel means loving Israel. And if, God forbid, one of the other greatest miracles in life is being an American, and Chas v'shalom, if this country were to go down, the state of Israel is there for us. Let the process happen. Give Israel a break. She is a light to the nations. all of us are recipients of her technology and medicine. Recently, their aid to Turkey and to Syria. It's Israel who shows up when not asked. It's a country during the Syrian revolution that they treated Syrian refugees and manipulated the surgeries to appear they were done in Iraq to make sure that when the Syrians went back to their country, they would not get in trouble by being seen by a Jew. Life isn't black and white. It's gray. So Thomas, please, if you're listening, write an article on the gray. We as a country need it. All the more so, Israel needs it. Again, she has big problems coming. Iran, Hezbollah, and we need to be there for her. Shabbat Shalom.